Do you believe in a higher power? An entity that you know exists, although you've never seen it or have any concrete proof of its existence. Is there something beyond our comprehension that is pulling the strings? And if so, could they have an ulterior motive? Would a god just influence the universe for the fun of it? Or do they strictly adhere to the order of things? Okay, alright, we get it. Moody, ominous Gaster intro that goes on for way too long. I'll just fast forward through this part until the guy says some outlandish bullshit with actual substance. Oh, this is it, I think. Everyone has been asking what is Gaster, who is Gaster, why is Gaster, but nobody ever bothered to ask how is Gaster. I'm not going to do that either. Instead, I want to ask where Gaster is. I don't want to find out his address to be clear, although that'd be a nice bonus. Rather his spiritual, conceptual, dimensional type of location. Why exactly do I want to know that? I have a feeling Gaster doesn't like where he is right now and is putting a whole lot of work in to get out of his current place. And Deltarune in combination with Undertale's Gaster-related foreshadowing gives us just enough to speculate on and maybe a few additional story tidbits. Let's start with the two Gaster facts we are most certain of. Number 1. Gaster directly communicates with us as the player base, which means he's able to step outside of the boundaries of the game Deltarune. This is kind of a step above just breaking the fourth wall, where a character in the game addresses the player directly. Gaster instead addresses us in menus between the actual game, and in programs outside of Deltarune, namely Twitter or Blue Sky. He also shares the game itself with us through the Deltarune.com website, meaning he has access to our internet from wherever he is. Number 2. Gaster only communicates in text. Okay, this one's a little complicated because technically everyone in Deltarune and Undertale only communicates in text. But every piece of dialogue is accompanied by these repeated sound bits which are supposed to emulate a voice. On top of that, we usually see the person that is speaking on our screen. For WD Gaster, we can observe this phenomenon only one time. In entry number 17. In it, he refers to an experiment that might already be ongoing, and he refers to 2 other people with him. In another place, we are told that Gaster fell into his creation. So based on the talking audio bits and him conversing with other people, it must be before he disappeared for forever. Every other interaction we have with him is in context to Deltarune. In those, we only get to see plain text trapped within a pseudo-void we don't know anything about. Or even worse, trapped within Twitter. There is speculative evidence on how Gaster looks, but he has no confirmed corporeal form at this point. Sure, there's this guy, but it's only a vague representation of Gaster through meta-connections. Plus in Undertale it's just a dummy or some kind of apparition. There's no text and it disappears as soon as you interact with it. If it ever was Gaster in some shape or form, it definitely isn't at the time we get to see it. Of course, it's a possibility that he'll appear on screen at any point in the future, but well, we'll get there. This one's kind of a bonus fact, but still important. Gaster has developed the technology to move through dimensions, timelines, parallel universes, or at least impact them in some way. Evidenced by Sans' little lab, who is connected to Gaster through the Gaster blasters, and a few other tidbits. It contains a reference to the 3 heroes of Deltarune's prophecy, and the machine which probably was able to do some kind of dimension hopping before it broke. Honestly, that machine breaking could have been the incident shortly after entry number 17, causing Gaster to disappear. I know this is all kind of vague, but the takeaway here is that Gaster has some form of interdimensional abilities and knowledge. Lastly, more of a base assertion for this video than a rule. All Gaster-related content in Undertale is foreshadowing Deltarune. To be specific, only Gaster-related content. Deltarune was an idea before the conception of Undertale, so it's only natural to already set it up there. Especially when they're already connected through the characters. To be clear, I'm not pulling any Undertale soul mechanics or any of that shit into Deltarune. Just the Gaster bits that are already completely sectioned off from Undertale's narrative and are generally really hard to find. Toby's dream story and the way Deltarune was presented in tweets, announcements, and other surrounding media heavily points towards Gaster being part of that fabled fever-induced ending. I'm not gonna recount all of that, but related bits will be brought up when relevant. If you want to know about them, just type Gaster in your local search bar. Google, YouTube, TikTok, the Bing, or the hot dog vendor around the corner. You don't need me to spend 20 minutes explaining all of the Gaster lore. Okay, these are the base assumptions I'm working with for the rest of the video. Essentially the type of microscope I'm going to examine Deltarune under. If any of these turn out to be flawed or flat out wrong, then there's still some funny jokes in here, I guess. With all that said, let's figure out what dimensions there even are to fuck around in. If there's one singular thing and absolutely nothing else we can learn from critically unacclaimed indie smash hit Yeek, it's that mixing realities, timelines, and dimensions without clear distinction can get confusing incredibly fast. Especially if you're trying to write a more mysterious story while being intentionally obtuse. Luckily, Deltarune has made the separations between his worlds very clear at this point. So before I go and make shit up over collections of 3 to 7 text boxes, let's look at the dimensions we 100% know exist and how they interact with each other. To the Deltarune dimension diagram. First off, the light world and the dark world. The light world is a more grounded world rooted in what we know of our reality. An unassuming rural American town where everybody knows each other. At least that's all we've seen of the light world so far, I'm sure there's more. The dark world is a more fantasy-like dimension that is created by the inhabitants of the light world. Are created rather, there isn't really one. Every dark world that is created by determinately stabbing a sharp object into the ground becomes an isolated instance that is shaped by who created it and where it was made. These are always connected by the same set of dimensional rules, but can't be traveled back and forth from unless they're physically connected in the light world. Or if you're Ralsei. Or you just start an excavation mission like Lancer. It's kind of like stabbing into an ice cream tub with multiple flavors. You get chocolate in one spot and strawberry on the other side. Still, they're the same consistency and physically connected. Both worlds have distinctly different rules. Objects in the light world are sentient beings in the dark world. Characters generally change their appearance when transitioning. Magic exists in the dark world. Food items replenish HP instead of hunger in the dark world, and probably other more minor rules. Makes it easy to know where you are at any point, if the big ass cutscene transition wasn't enough. Or the fact that the dark world is dark while the light world is light. Game design genius Toby Fox does it again. We do know about one more dimension, the depths, birthplace of the Titans. At least that's what its presumed name is at this point. The knight created a portal to the depths in the same way you connect to the dark world by stabbing its sword into the ground. It hasn't created a portal or a place of transition per se though. Rather, a titan instantly spilled out of the fountain, which means they're either roaring to jump out and destroy shit immediately, or is as crowded in there as the emergency room on New Year's Eve. Or the titans are the depths in some kind of way. We don't really know based on what Deltarune has shown us so far, but there's something there and it's a different dimension of some kind. Looking at the diagram so far, we can perceive a pretty distinct pattern. The further down we go, or the darker we go, the less adjacent to reality and put together the given dimension is. The light world is just a normalish American town with animal people. The dark world has magic, sentient objects and impossible structures, and the depths are just a formless void. There's not really any further to dig down after a formless void, so why don't we just go up instead? All the way at the top of course is us, the real reality, where you, me and Mr. Toby Fox exist. It is also where the dimensions within the game Deltarune stop existing, basically laying down an inner boundary for its fictional dimensions and an outer boundary for all dimensions. At least in my opinion, feel free to speculate. Still very relevant to Deltarune though, as there are characters that are definitely aware of our reality. Now it feels like there's something missing here, but I can concretely place another dimension, which means it's time for some speculation. Do we have any other esoteric locations mentioned in Deltarune that you could symbolically place above the light world and are maybe mentioned by a relevant character and can take on multiple meanings? Well, it just so happens that we have a place that perfectly fits this incredibly specific description. It's heaven. First mentioned in the prophecy as the Angel's Heaven, don't forget about that. And then obsessed over by Spamton in Chapter 2. The angel specifically is mentioned by Elven a bunch. It seems to be the central figure of Hometown's religion, clearly placed as the god, making the angel an inhabitant of heaven in some way. For the sake of mentioning it, hell also exists, but there's only one significant mention of it in the Tale of Hell, where it has more of a possessive function instead of being its own thing. The other 166 uses of the word hell are just Susie swearing. On that note, Noelle is often referenced as an angel. I don't think that makes her the literal angel that Alvin talks about, especially because of the otherworldly nature it is being talked about. She carries a lot of the visual references in the white robes and wings that makes people refer to her as an angel, and obviously that carries a lot of significance in the context of Deltarune's storytelling. I'm sure she'll play a major role in our inevitable confrontation with the angel, but I can't imagine her becoming that looming threat in any way. Speaking of, Hometown's religion is very reminiscent of Christianity. The terminology heaven is of course one of many examples for that. So maybe heaven in Deltarune is closer to that idea in essence. An unimaginable place that you believe in but don't have any tangible proof of. Contrary to the depths, which are so empty that it's impossible to imagine anything existing, heaven is so incomprehensible that it's just as impossible to conceive of. Of course, contrary to our world, heaven in Deltarune is real to some degree, so we should find out about it eventually. Otherwise the entire narrative of the game would fall flat. Yeah, sorry Christianity, I'm firmly agnostic. Gospel music is pretty cool though. Point is, we have no clue what heaven is like, but in our dimensional diagram it clocks in above the light world, finalizing the dimension placements for now. But it's still worth looking at how the dimensions are connected, specifically who gets to pass through and why. I already somewhat touched on the border between dark and light world. Lightness can pass through in both directions, darkness only actually exists in the dark world. It'd be interesting to see what happens if they tried to pass through one of those ground doors. Nobody has attempted that so far, but we've only just gotten a proper explanation on what dark worlds are, so there isn't much to extrapolate for now. In summary, the border here is kind of a soft barrier that can be crossed back and forth by certain entities under certain conditions. Moving on to the Dark World Depths barrier. While we haven't seen much of it so far, it seems to work in a similar-ish manner to the previous border. Only certain entities can pass through, the Titans, and it closes and opens the same way as the dark fountains connecting to the Light World. Where opening a fountain in the Light World is like unlocking the door to your house, opening one in the Dark World feels more like pulling the release lever in a maximum security prison. Then there's Heaven, and yeah, we barely know shit about it at this point. But these green strings attached to Swampton have to come from somewhere, and he keeps talking about Heaven, so maybe we can connotate this aspect of control to it. We know that the angel is going to do something from Heaven, potentially cross that barrier towards the Light World. And if we want to go by the pattern established so far, it's unlikely that Lightners will be able to access Heaven, although the Titans have already broken that pattern by being able to move upwards on the dimensional ladder. Lastly, there's Reality. Now I know none of the Deltarune characters are making it there, but Ralsei and his merry band of metagamers obviously know they're in a game, or at least something like it. It feels like they're knocking on a one-way mirror from the inside, aware that somebody is watching but never able to receive any feedback from the other side. We as players don't really cross the barrier either. Sure, the soul is meant to be a representation of us in the world of Deltarune, but it still is just a very abstracted version of a player character that we are controlling. Nonetheless, we have an impact on the world. It's rather that we're connecting to a device which has this combination of all Deltarune worlds in it. Through that, we as the players can interface with Deltarune by downloading it from the website or buying it on Steam. And that device is Gaster's Deltarune, a physical machine that he created during his lifespan as the royal scientist in Undertale. Not this thing, a working one, we haven't seen it of course, this is just a broken prototype. More on all that in about 16 minutes. Of course, this isn't even close to entirely my idea. I've pretty much looped back around to a version of the device theory from another direction. Which is a good thing, by the way. Coming to this conclusion from that many different angles only makes it more plausible. Though I am getting more specific by saying that Gaster made all of it. He created the dimensions that are being simulated within the device and the tech that lets us and him connect to it. That doesn't mean he is the arbiter of everything that happens in Deltarune, it is a self-reliant simulation in that sense. But there are a lot of strings that he can pull if he wanted to. For us as the player, it's more like a rigged claw machine if you want a more practical explanation. You got some buttons to push and guys to shove back and forth, but things will still move around and fall in place on their own. Although maybe if you cheat and tilt the machine a bunch, then there's some other outcome to get to. That's also why I don't think we are the angel as the player. The de facto god of the world should have control over everything, but really we're just along for the ride trying to pick up every scrap of independence we can find. So the border between heaven and reality, and therefore between the game, Deltarune, and reality is essentially another layer. The device layer. A culmination of every meta element that lets you experience Deltarune's narrative. Oh, also Undertale is a dimension. It's the only place where Gaster gets referenced as an actual person, so it has to be an existent place. That could also explain why the same characters exist between both games. They are templates pulled from Undertale that now behave differently in Deltarune due to their changed experiences. Okay, we finally have Deltarune's dimensions down, but that doesn't really mean anything if we don't know who moves around in them. Luckily there's an abundance of mysterious troublemakers around, and behind them even more obscure characters shrouded in darkness. So I've taken all of Deltarune's mischief makers and turned them into balls, and stuffed them into the gacha machine. Like that we can examine everyone's place within Deltarune's dimensions one at a time, figuring out their most likely home at this moment and what dimensions they have knowledge of. Starting with Kris. They obviously originate in the light world, but it's hard to know what exactly they're aware of because of, you know, the thing where we don't hear them speak. That being said, we've seen them be involved in the Carol plus Night conspiracy, so they should know about the deaths in addition to the dark world, of course. For the record, when I say a character knows about a certain dimension, I mean that they have a concept of what that dimension is like. Just knowing it could exist won't be enough. Alvin might keep talking about heaven, but I highly doubt he has any clue what to expect in case he gets there. That's not a threat, to be clear. From what we know at this point, he's just guessing and believing in it very hard. Currently there's no reason to assume Kris has any idea about whatever heaven is, but them knowing about our reality is much more likely because of the whole alien entity controlling you situation. I'm sure that has come up in the conspiracy group chat at some point. Speaking of which, Carol has essentially the same knowledge as Kris since they're conspiring together. It's more questionable whether Carol also knows about reality. She did drop the big red U, of course, but if you've seen my last Deltarune video, you know that I'm on the fence about what exactly that means. For now, I'm more inclined to exclude her from reality. That's also not a threat. Rousey originates in the Dark World and he knows everything, of all the dimensions and probably more than that. He's confirmed his knowledge about the entire prophecy, which heavily revolves around movement between the different dimensions. The night opening fountains, titans emerging, the angel appearing and being unappeared. Okay, he doesn't know everything, his ultimate goal is apparently to fulfill the prophecy. So whatever comes after that might not be so familiar to him anymore. Rousey has mostly been characterized by his obsession with the narrative to the point where he's only just learning to be his own person. It would be interesting to see him deal with a situation that is completely unexpected to him. Like, narratively. This is the last time I subtextually threaten a video game character, I promise. Chom originated in the Dark World, probably as Asriel's old plush that has been left somewhere at school, and has at some point been cursed with more knowledge than they ever wanted. Chom specifically seems to also know the prophecy. At least they can pretty accurately predict the future, evidenced by their little anecdote about the Addisons. That being said, they keep getting surprised by us beating the secret bosses, meaning it's apparently not a planned part of the prophecy. So with knowledge of the prophecy and a very subtle wink to the player, Chom most likely knows about all of the dimensions. Contrary to Rousey, they are locked in their shop though, dealing with the existential dread in their own way. Whoops, I held down the trigger too long and a bunch of secret bosses popped out. Similarly to Chom, Javel, Eram and the Old Man have all been cursed with too much knowledge about the prophecy. They probably know all of the dimensions, but there's no proper way to discern which ones or back up any claims as they just don't talk about them. So I just marked them down as maybes for the depths, heaven and reality. Their dialogues provide some interesting color to the whole device situation though. Javel, for example, is the first one to lampshade the fun gang just being characters in a game, telling them they're trapped while he is actually the free one. In a talk with the Old Man Gerson, we also learn of this long fiction spiral starting with Tennor's game, leading through the Cat Patters RPG, Dragon Blazers, Lord of the Hammer, and the prophecy just being straight up what happens in Deltarune. Spampton G. Spampton should have the same knowledge as all the other secret bosses. But he's the only one to talk about heaven, so he's gotta know something about it, right? Nothing concrete, unfortunately, apart from stuff we already know. Control, angel, prophecy, higher reality, all that jazz. But without him we wouldn't know about heaven at all, so that's a win, I guess. Spampton A. Spampton.
Tastes like fresh.
Now we're getting somewhere. The narrator. I'm subscribed to the notion that Deltarune's narrator is at least an omniscient entity in relation to its world and possibly straight up Toby Fox. Both because it makes a lot of sense and it saves me from having to analyze an avalanche of narrator text boxes myself. And if we place the narrator in reality, then it pretty much has to be him. If the narrator is within the device layer, however, there's a similarly singular option for who it could be. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just say it's Toby Fox for now for the sake of simplicity. The player. Yes, we are part of this metafuckery just as much as everybody else. Theorizing aside, what do we really know? Of course our own reality, and then the dark world and light world. We sure as hell don't know shit about heaven, but the depths? Does seeing a titan count as understanding what the depths are? I feel like there's more to it. We have been in one other unidentified place though, showcasing some textures that are very reminiscent of the titans inside. The Gunnermaker sequence probably takes place in the depths, so have we at least been there? Yeah. Does that help us understand them any further? No, not really. Hard to say whether the angel even is part of Toby's meta construct. It is set up as the ultimate threat in the narrative as of now, so it's not surprising that we don't know shit about it with the night still on our way. All I've got on it for now is that it's inhabiting heaven and it knows about heaven. Everything else is a mystery. Alright, I forgot about this guy. We've seen Sans in 2 dimensions so far, ones that aren't particularly easy to travel between on top of that. Actually, how is he doing that? The only thing that could have enabled travel from Undertale to Deltarune so far is the broken machine, but it seems like Sans is able to inherently travel through time and space, as Undertale and Deltarune have demonstrated and stated numerous times. So it's not too much of a stretch to say that he could also travel from Undertale to Deltarune by himself. Something that he likely learned during his research on the machine with, or at least parallel to Gaster. And if he isn't restricted by the machine being broken, then it's not too far-fetched to say that he can travel back and forth between the 2 dimensions either. On top of that, the way he acts between them is quite different. In Undertale, Sans behaves more reactively while underhandedly threatening the player character, knowing he can't quite stand up to them if the worst comes to pass. In Deltarune, Sans seems to be ahead of the narrative, preventing Toriel from being night-napped in the church by inviting her into the grocery store. Only a one-off example, I know, but judging by Sans' demeanor so far, I wouldn't be surprised if we get more interceptions of that kind. Because of that, I think that Sans did originate in Undertale and is in Deltarune to find a way to recover Gaster from wherever he is. Now, if Sans can just hop dimensions like it's nothing, why doesn't he just get to Gaster? Well, the answer lies in the reality power scaling situation that comes with the dimensions in the UTDR universe. Sans can't teleport to a place that he doesn't know of. Just as everybody else, he's trying to figure out where Gaster even is. So right now Sans is just hanging out in the light world, but probably has his origins in Undertale. As far as his knowledge goes, no fucking clue. He hasn't really said anything narratively important in Deltarune yet. But it's Sans, so he probably knows a whole lot. The Eggman moves on the absolute outer edges of Deltarune, hidden behind repetitive RNG checks or insanely convoluted creepypasta sequences. You have to know a lot to pull that off, and he reveals in the Chapter 3 egg room that he too has prophecy-like knowledge of the game by detailing other egg locations, although you could also say that he's just reading out his errand list for the week. Even going a little further to reach outside the world of Deltarune, at least if you want to believe that he's the one who wrote the Valentine's letter. So where does he actually come from? Putting him in the dark world would mean that he has to be an object in the light world, which I don't believe is the case. At this point I'd put him in the device layer, but honestly I have no clue. There is even still a tiny chance that it is actually Gaster. Okay, 3 balls left. The voice in the code. Definitely one of the late game mysteries that foreshadows something we're completely unaware of right now. And definitely someone stuck in the wrong dimension. The assumption before Chapter 3 and 4 was that it's Des, but since her appearance as the Knight in some shape or form, a lot of doubt has been cast on that theory. Or rather, it hasn't been picked up any further at this point. The problem is that we don't know anyone else in Deltarune that has mysteriously disappeared into nothingness for a reason we don't understand. So that leaves us with 3 options. Number 1, it's Des in the past through some code-based flashback magic, which is followed by some horrible transformation into the Night creature. Number 2, only Des's soul is in the code at this point, for her body to be repurposed and taken over by some other entity or changed in some form due to lack of soul. Number 3 is somebody entirely else, not Gaster though. Unfortunately, we can't discern much from the text in the code about said person, apart from the fact that they like breakfast and late night TV. Which, I mean, sounds a tiny bit like this, but let's be real, who doesn't like breakfast? Okay, I don't if I have to make it myself, but you get the sentiment. I'd go with option 2 if I had to pick. It's the least convoluted and makes the most sense based on the few lines that suggest the voice in the code doesn't really feel like they have a body. But that could also just as well be caused by the dimension they're in directly. So what is that particular dimension? We can learn at least a bit about it from the text. It is completely dark, there's no sense of time, sense of hunger, or even sense of self. Utter silence has settled across this place except for a certain scratching sound. Now you would think of a cat when you hear the word scratching, but hold on, we'll get to the cat. I don't think that's it in this case. The way that it's worded suggests that the scratching only happens when somebody is listening. Ergo, somebody is reading the unused text, which only happens when the code is directly accessed. And that has to mean the voice in the code is physically in the code. Deltarune's code is one of the dimensions of its universe. That also explains why there's no sense of having a body here. This whole place is only meant to store text. It's essentially 2D. The only thing you can do in this dimension is print out text and execute code if you know how. I know it's a big claim, but stick with me here, we'll loop back around to this in a bit. For now the question is whether the code is its own separate dimension or if it's maybe the same as one of the other places. Bringing us all the way back to Spamton, who actually hacks together some connection between the code and heaven. He recites a brief part of the unused text during his fear-induced micropsychosis and keeps talking about heaven in some desperate attempt to get there. He clearly knows something and he must have gotten it from the phone calls, which are already dripping with ghasteriness. Now where does the voice in the code actually go? The diagram looks all neat and organized now, but this is a lot of dimensions considering how the game has only introduced us to the dark and light world at this point. Also a little reminder here that although I arranged them kind of like sedimentary layers, I'm not trying to represent the physical locations of each dimension. That being said, a few sections here overlap quite a lot. Spamton connected the code in heaven, code is included in the device layer, and the voice in the code could very well be talking about the depths during their desperate cry for help. And then Undertale is also there. Especially the code, heaven, and the device layer are thematically pretty much the same, so I should probably merge those. While the depths do connect with them through the Gornamaker sequence, their main role right now is being a Titan dispenser, so I'll keep them where they are right now. As for Undertale, honestly I'm not sure. I feel like I opened Pandora's box by even adding it. It should technically be between the device layer and reality because the device is in Undertale. which means that the device is essentially the connection point between reality and Deltarune. Does that make sense? Yeah. Alright, let me make some adjustments to this baby. And look, there's a reason I've been using the other version so far. This might be an abomination, but it's my abomination, and technically more accurate to what I'm trying to convey. So the voice in the code goes into what I'll just call heaven from now on. But what do they know? Working with the assumption that it is death, but not the night, they surely know about the light world, but everything else is hard to confirm. Definitely not the depths or reality, and heaven, well, she's there, but she has no idea what the shit is happening, so I'll give that one a maybe. After figuring out all the dimensional knickknacks and nailing down the details on the whole death situation, we can finally get to an unsurprisingly basic interpretation of the night. Also, yes, death is the night, I'm not putting that up for debate here. Let's be real for just 1 minute, this thing is not a person in an elaborate costume. You can't just be a normal ass person for a second and then turn into this abomination for your part-time job. Theorizing existing hometown members as the Night was valid before Chapter 3 when we had no idea of the Night's appearance, but now it's pretty ridiculous. While we're at it, these are not tears, it's goop scooping down from the Night's scoopy body to signify how much of a non-standard entity it is. And I know you're gonna bring up the helmet thing, but it's in Chris's imagination. It's a metaphor for the Night reveal fakeout. Even then, the Night can just goop themselves a helmet because they can essentially transform into anything they want. That's what they do with this shit. That's how they turn into a bird suddenly. That's how the baseball turned into a sword. The whole thing is just a gooped out Death Knight freak of nature that can transform into every possible object known to mankind. We don't have to make it that complicated. Having said that, as the final member of the conspiracy trifecta, the remaining conscious part of the Night certainly knows about the light world all the way down to the depths, but anywhere else is dubious at best. It actually hasn't interacted with Deltarune's meta elements much yet, mostly being busy as the proper main antagonist spanning all 4 chapters. The only intersection it had with anything Gaster related so far was entering the bunker. Even then, that bunker has a few more facets to it than just being the place where Gaster sounds play. As for the Knight's origin point, Death was presumably born in the light world, but I doubt that's where this whole transformation took place. The two most likely locations for that are the depths or heaven. Based on that whole voice in the code business, I'd wager heaven is the likelier option, but we don't have evidence pointing towards either at this point. Which means the Knight would know about all the dimensions except for reality. One day, Gaster fell into his creation, vanishing without a trace. But what exactly was his creation? In that Gaster follower conversation specifically, the core is mentioned, so that would be the first thing you think of. What really is there to fall into and vanish without a trace in the core? It is a tower of electric energy containing constantly changing rooms. I don't think he got trapped in between his ever-changing rooms. Surely a backrooms type operation was launched to investigate the core after his disappearance that would have found his rotten corpse somewhere in there. And if he dropped into the lava, they surely wouldn't have called that his creation. So he had to fall into something there that was powered by the core, one of his experiments. One final tidbit I haven't mentioned yet is this little audio file called ABC123A. It was delicately placed at the top of Undertale's game files and at some point told people not to leak secrets by looking into the code.
Hello, have some respect and don't spoil the game. It's impossible to have mysteries nowadays.
Because of nosy people like you.
Please keep all of this between us.
If you post it online, I won't make any more secrets.
No one will be impressed.
It will be your fault.
When they very predictably did it anyway, the file changed to just this. Now that's kind of a funky free association to Deltarune's themes on its own, but the real interesting part lies back in entry number 17. Because that's where we hear Gaster's little voice clips, and those are cut out of the TTS voices in that little audio file. Does that mean this fucked up TTS amalgamation is Gaster's actual voice? Doesn't have to, but it is undoubtedly more Gaster-related Deltarune setup. Because of all that, we can safely assume that one of these experiments, and specifically the one Gaster fell into, is the device. And when I think of the ever-changing core of a device, especially a software one, the first thing I think of is a codebase. So Gaster fell into Deltarune's codebase, which is, as we just established, a dimension of Deltarune's universe. This is why you can only converse in text wherever we come across him. Twitter, the survey program, the Gorner Maker sequences, the menus, the cutscene intermissions. He is stuck in his own code and doing his best to communicate with us as the players through it. That's the reason we haven't been able to hear Gaster ever since entry number 17. He got stuck in a textual dimension, just like the voice in the code. with the big difference being that he knows how to code and has written all of it, turning Gaster into the ultimate Linux user. So from there he's orchestrating his escape from the Deltarune, the one with the space. How exactly that plan is executed and what role we play in it exactly and why it is so fucking convoluted is yet to be seen. So far we've just been along for the ride, enabling Kris to deal with the fountains and titans as the soul. There's one big conclusion here though that a lot of you might not want to hear, but it is a possibility. Gaster will only ever stay a text-based entity. If he finds a way to leave the device layer, he will just disappear from the Deltarune universe for good. Conversely, that could mean he would appear back in Undertale. After all, that's where he fell into his creation. Which is why there's an Undertale dimension between the device layer and the reality. This is getting a little fucked up now, but Undertale getting a Gaster update after Deltarune finishes would be really funny. Okay, that's all of the balls, but I feel like I forgot something. Oh, looks like this little guy has been here the whole time. Yeah, this is finally where Friend comes in and why it exists in the device layer. It's essentially Gaster's tool to have an impact on the other dimensions and steer aspects of the story in the direction he needs them to. Or maybe his pet in some way if you really want Friend to be a cat. Honestly, I'm not very tied to that whole theory. Gaster's garbage noise phone incidents and Friend's involvement with secret bosses intersect in so many places that they have to fit together in some way. That being said, Friend hasn't explicitly done anything at this point. It hung out in some spots related to secret bosses and brought a shit ton of yellow and pink colored connotations with it. We don't even know if it's a sentient being, it could just be Gaster's little drone that he controls by furiously inputting commands. I know Friend explanations are the hype right now, but I'd like to see it actually do something before I make any kind of conclusive statement. Not that connecting all the yellow and pink stuff isn't interesting, but it's a little too vibes-based for myself. I know that's big coming from the yellow text guy, but you know there's actual worth attached to those at least. To finally answer the video's initial question, Gaster is in heaven, or rather wherever Deltarune citizens think heaven is. It's not like Gaster is the angel. Well, actually, we've gone so far off the beaten path now that I might as well indulge. As the creator of this universe, residing in heaven, doesn't that just make Gaster the god of this world, aka the angel? See, the prophecy in the church dogwood has kind of peculiar wording. The angel, banished, will finally meet with its desire. The angel wants to be banished from the world, and then the bad stuff happens. Really, the only dude I can imagine who wants to be banished from the world is the one who fell into it by accident, presumably. I don't think you as the player desires to be banished from the world, nor do I think Noel is suicidal. If the angel is some kind of non-sentient entity that'll bring chaos upon the world, then I'm unsure it would even have desires. Not to mention the desire to be banished. Plus, I can imagine shit would go haywire after Gaster disappears. He seems like a pretty integral part of the whole system. Not to mention, as the angel is his prophecy. Ultimately, it's his escape plan from the Deltarune. He has assembled all the pieces to get him out of his own creation, and now the plan just needs to be executed properly, with no regard for what might happen after he takes his leave. But of course, things rarely ever go according to plan. Hold on. Isn't Gaster heavily affiliated with the number 666, and doesn't that represent the devil? Good point, but not really. Let's actually take a proper look at it. Yes, in modern context, 666 is casually connected to the devil, but in the Bible it's a lot more specific. And because of chapter 4, we can make a pretty solid assumption that Toby Fox was raised Christian. I've seen people say he outright stated that at some point, but I couldn't find anything about that. Either way, with all the additional Christian imagery, it's very likely that he applied the number 666 as it's known in the Christian teachings. Which means, and I can't believe I'm about to say that 30 minutes into a Deltarune YouTube video, it's time to do a little Bible study. Disclaimer that I've never even held a Bible in my hand, so I'm by no means knowledgeable in this field, and some of this is probably not contextualized properly. But I'll keep it as simple as possible for both your and my benefit. So the passage where the number 666 shows up in the Bible is Revelation 13. Feel free to read this yourself for context. It is described as the number of the beast, and is preceded by the description of two separate beasts. The first one gets summoned by a dragon that is later revealed to be Satan. It has 10 horns, 7 heads and 10 crowns, and the dragon gives that beast all of its power and authority. Everybody worshipped and followed the beast, it blasphemed against God and was given power to wage war against God's holy people and then conquer them. Again, I don't have the context to understand how exactly that unfolded. Then the second beast came out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like the dragon. Now this is a common interpretation of what the devil looks like, but just a chapter earlier that dragon from earlier was very explicitly described as Satan and the devil. So that second beast then essentially took over for the first beast by making fire come down from the heavens, which deceived the people into being given the power to perform in its stead. Then all people were forced to receive a mark, and whoever refused it got trade banned. And that mark, which is the number of the beast, or its name, is 666. It is also kind of presented as the number of all mankind, presumably the one that is marked. So at best, 666 is the number of this second beast that is distinctly not Satan or the devil or even the Antichrist, but it is later called the false prophet. And this is where we loop back to Gaster. He couldn't have been the god of Deltarune from the start after all if he fell into his creation at some point. But when Gaster did, he started taking over and assembled the prophecy to orchestrate his escape. So what I'm getting at is that the 666 signifies Gaster inserting himself into the story, potentially with a malicious motivation. It still puts him in opposition to a quote-unquote god if there is one in Deltarune's world, but not as a straight antithesis to everything heaven and godlike. I'm not even sure what the original interpretation of this devil number connotation is, but if I'm going to posit that Gaster is in heaven, then I'd rather get ahead of that whole thing. Back to the normal part of the video. Notably, this extremely hidden prophecy panel and the ones that follow deviate from Raz's telling of the prophecy. According to him, banishing the angels' heaven is followed by balance being restored and the world is saved from destruction. He leaves out some pretty important details by implying that banishing the angels' heaven is what restores balance. It's rather that the angel has to be banished, that causes some form of catastrophe, and then to save the world, the heroes have to do whatever the smashed prophecy says. Only after all that would balance be restored. Raz has already admitted that he took some personal liberties summarizing the prophecy, so I'm pinning that misrepresentation on him. Who knows whether it's an accident, intentional, or just a really shitty game of telephone. But Raz seems to be most occupied with somehow transforming the prophecy's intended ending. Maybe this is his form of wishful thinking, somehow deluding himself into preventing the inevitable. I also looked for a different telling of the prophecy to double check it, and we actually kind of get one from Caddy at church. Once you get through the dense jungle of a Valley Girl accent, love thy neighborisms and verbal detours, it's just about the three heroes, and notably that the prophecy is from the angel, which lines up with what we've seen so far. She does eventually make it to the part where calamity occurs, and of course she forgot about all that. Doesn't help us confirm anything, but it highlights that the section of the prophecy is very intentionally obscured. Unfortunately, without knowing anyone's motives for sure, it's impossible to figure out more here. Gaster is very obviously saving his big moments for the very late game, so I'm not even sure if we'll learn much more about him in Chapter 5. We'll probably have to somewhat manage the whole Night Dark World Titan fuckery before the angel and that part of the prophecy gets some major spotlight again. I think that concludes today's dig into the fucked up Deltarune mystery mines. I'm usually not a fan of looking into the prophecy too much because of how intentionally obscure it still is, as you just saw, but that's just where we landed this time, so who am I to prevent that? And now it's your problem. Goodbye.